Ladies and gentlemen, in this Gaming Telecom video, we're going to be discussing the rather messy and controversial Ashes of the Singularity benchmark. We're actually going to be doing a lot of testing on this benchmark this weekend because we want to wait for the dust to settle a little bit. Nvidia have been kind of blaming Oxide. We'll go into that in just a second regarding the performance, whereas on the other hand, Oxide and AMD saying, nope, it's business as usual at the moment, it's probably something to do with your driver, obviously blaming Nvidia. So what is all of this? Well, of course we've had 3D Mark, which has given us a fairly synthetic idea of the number of draw calls. We haven't really had anything that you could consider to be a realistic game representation of performance until Ashes of the Singularity, which has just popped up. And now do remember, Ashes of the Singularity at the moment is early alpha. That's very important because at the end of the day that means the code is not even slightly close to being finished. But to Nvidia, and I quote, they believe that the benchmark has limited usefulness as it will tell you how your system runs a series of pre-selected scenes from the alpha version of Ashes of Singularity, and they do not believe this is a good indicator of overall DirectX 12 gaming performance. One of the key complaints Nvidia have is MSAA. But of course, Oxide Games are taking the fight back to Nvidia. In fact, they claim that fundamentally, and I quote, the MSAA path is essentially unchanged in DirectX 11 and 12. Any statement which says there is a bug in the application should be disregarded as, I quote once again, inaccurate information. And what they believe is that, and I quote, our analysis indicates that any Direct 3D12 problems are quite mundane, new API, new drivers, some optimizations that the drivers are doing in DirectX 11 are just not working, and Oxide believes it has identified some of the issues with MSAA and is working to implement workarounds around our code. There is no ways affects the validity of DirectX 12 to DirectX 12 tests, as it's the same workaround being sent to everyone's GPU. This is just a type of optimization, is the nature of brand new APIs with immature drivers, and there's a simple fact that DirectX 12 is brand new, and for the time being developers and graphics vendors need to optimize their use of it. We remember the days of DirectX 11 when nothing worked, and basically they continue to say that DirectX 12 is a big win for PC gamers. It allows gamers to use full use of their graphics and CPUs by eliminating the serialization of graphics commands between the processor and graphics card. I'm sure everyone knows what that is, out of quote at this point. It just, for 2 or 3 of you who may be new viewers, it simply means that it pushes the draw calls, which all the draw call is in a nutshell is the CPU telling an object, or the GPU, to draw a specific object on screen. And because the DirectX 12 can work in parallel, in other words across multiple cores at a time, it can handle a lot more draw calls. Pretty simple. If you do want more information, you can check out any of our DirectX 12 analysis. Oxide also point out that they have worked with Nvidia, they've worked with AMD, and most importantly Microsoft for years, and they have regularly given code drops of their engine and done internal benchmarks to generate, and I quote, realistic workloads. And indeed, they even say that they've made their source code available to Nvidia, AMD, Microsoft and Intel for over a year, and they've received a massive amount of feedback, and even stated, for example, when Nvidia noticed a specific shader that was particularly long time on their hardware, they offered an optimized shader that made things faster, which they integrated then into their own code. And we have only 2 requirements implementing vendor optimizations: it not be a loss for other hardware implementations. So in other words, out of quote, this simply means that if you have an optimization for Nvidia, it can't negatively affect AMD or Intel, which is fair in my opinion. And they also require that it doesn't move the engine architecture backwards. So in other words, it can't be a retrogressive move, it has to still be forward thinking. AMD of course are being rather, well, let's just say they're chuckling at Nvidia, and they Roy over at AMD said, and I quote, that's the vice president, Roy Taylor, corporate vice president of AMD, said if you can't beat them, blame them, and then obviously gives a little dig at GameWorks by saying from the makers of GameWorks. Obviously Nvidia and AMD are kind of at blows regarding the whole GameWorks situation, and there was even some talk a while back, although whether it's happening or not, that AMD are going to be releasing a whole GameWorks suite. And to be fair, I guess they've kind of got the makings of quite a lot of it by now. That, you know, they want to release their own open source version of GameWorks, effectively. What are my opinions on it? Well, honestly speaking, it's kind of early to tell. Nvidia did release a driver update which supposedly improved the performance of Ashes, but at the end of the day, the driver doesn't seem to be that effective. I don't think, however, the final retail code, or even, let's say, a week from now, it's going to be the same thing, because obviously it's just a case of this is still early stuff, so no one needs to panic. I personally, and this is from my own point of view, not really as an insider of the industry or anything like that, but just from dealing with these companies, from speaking with companies, from doing benchmarks and all of this stuff, I think there's a big problem, and I don't really want to go super in depth into it, but I think that the companies really do need to talk to one another a little bit and become a little bit more amicable. In this case, of course, they are rivals at the end of the day, so it's kind of that, but no one can really expect there to not be hiccups at this stage. It is alpha code at the end of the day, so I would prefer, honestly, and I'm not blaming Nvidia or Oxide, but I would prefer, you know, the companies just to kind of work together and improve performance, because that's best for everyone, at least in my opinion. As I said, we will be doing full testing of this over the next few days. I don't want to reveal any results we may or may not have at the moment, because quite frankly we want to be doing it on quite a large sample of GPUs and a large sample of different CPU configurations, because I figure that's fairer, and I'm really hoping that by the time we start, well, finishing off the test, we'll actually have better code samples. In other words, there might be an updated driver, so I might even wait to see if Nvidia do release a new driver and just do AMD at the moment and then release Nvidia. I guess it kind of depends on what we hear about over the next couple of days, because if it turns out that Nvidia's driver is screwed up and let's say there's a bug in it which may or may not be caused by Nvidia, I'm not blaming them. It could be a slight variant of DirectX 12, which could be somewhat Microsoft's fault. It could be Nvidia have a slight code path issue. It could be actually the Singularity has a slight problem because it is alpha. So regardless, if there is a small bug which is like halving Nvidia's performance, I'm obviously just throwing an arbitrary number out there, which is one of the reasons that there's not that much difference between DirectX 12 and 11 performance on Nvidia hardware, then it's really unfair to release benchmarks at this stage, at least in my opinion. So I'd prefer to wait a couple of days, but I will figure out, you know, what's going on, hopefully from the news. But I will be releasing something this weekend, probably at the very least concentrating on AMD, just to see what the whole hype was about. And obviously if it's AMD the ones that were having the problems, it would have been the reverse, and Nvidia would have been the ones that were being benchmarked, and AMD would have to kind of sit on the back shelf. Things are always difficult in GPU land, aren't they? But hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.